At 2:17 p.m., the registrar told me my mother didn't exist in their system, then asked, in a tone that sounded like hospitality wearing a badge, who gave me her direct number. The kettle on my stove screamed thinly, a household panic that felt almost theatrical beside the calm authority of the voice on speaker. On my laptop, the calendar block pulsed a placid blue. Mom. Outpatient. 2 p.m. The kind of digital certainty that usually keeps fear obedient. I fed the registrar every anchor I had. My mother's full name, the spelling we always correct at pharmacies, her birthday that I can say backward, the last 4 digits of her social that I store in my phone like a prayer. The words met a surface I couldn't penetrate. "We're not finding her," the woman said, and then, "We don't have her scheduled," and finally, "We can't confirm patient identities." Each phrase a softer door that still refused to open. Anxiety gathered itself into a steady pressure beneath my ribs. I refused to let it spill into my voice. Beside the fruit bowl lay a blue hospital wristband, curled like a shed skin. My mother left it there last night, smiling at my fussing, saying they had printed 2 by mistake, teasing me for acting like a chaperone at a school dance. Under the kitchen light, the band became an accusation. Her name was correct, the middle initial was not, and the date of birth was off by 2 days exactly, as if someone had copied familiarity without precision. Suspicion moved into the room with the quiet confidence of someone who knows where the light switches are. I slid the band into a sandwich bag, the cheap kind that crinkles like a lie. In my mother's tote, I found the pre-op consent instructions, folded once, edges still stiff, signature lines blank. She is a faithful signer of anything clinical. I have watched her initial forms with the concentration of a person who believes thoroughness can bargain with fate. The emptiness on those lines felt like a hand brushing dust from a crime scene. I told the registrar I was holding documentation that established my mother's procedure block for 2 o'clock, and I asked for something simple. Unit, surgeon, check-in. The registrar's vowels warmed by a degree, the way customer service does when it tries to hydrate, bring insurance card, text me when you're in pre-op, blinked, untouched, like doorbells no one answered. The lemon clean smell on my fingertips from wiping the counter this morning turned ambiguous. My mother polishes surfaces when she is nervous, and the apartment gleamed as if someone had prayed to the god of appearances. I spoke into the stillness, narrating for the record I intended to keep. I said the time aloud and repeated the registrar's sentence. At 2:17 p.m., you told me there is no patient by my mother's name in your system. The line did a small, human thing. It breathed. Then came the policy tone again, the sound of a person sheltering behind laminated language. "We can't confirm that," she said, and I heard the slippage, the refusal to repeat the absolute she had already uttered. I asked for a supervisor. Hold music replaced her, sugar water for the anxious. I listened for almost a minute, then ended the call, because what I needed now lived outside the phones. Moral fury lifted like a tide I could stand on. I took photographs that framed my watch face in the corner of each artifact, because hospitals speak in timestamps the way pilots speak in altitude and speed. I bagged the wristband, smoothed the consent pages, clipped the gas receipt to a printout of the calendar block, and wrote questions in ink at the top. Unit, surgeon, BAB swipe time, consent upload user, blanks that institutions dislike leaving empty. I called back through the main number and reached a second registrar who sounded brighter, almost maternal, until I asked for a yes or a no. She asked where I had gotten the previous extension, and I understood the choreography. Shift attention from the missing person to the inconvenient caller. Make the daughter the variable. I wanted to cry. Not because I was fragile, but because tears come from the same place as rage, and both have to go somewhere. Instead, I straightened the stack in my hands the way my father, a physics teacher with a talent for courtroom documentaries, used to straighten his own notes before parent conferences. He taught me the comfort of conservation. When an outcome doesn't match the inputs, energy is hidden in the system. People hide it. Logs do not. Audit trails do not. Timestamps do not. I would go where the logs lived. I shut the burner and watched the floor tilts. I took my keys from the hook. I told myself I would arrive, speak to a person with a name tag, present my timestamps, and embarrass the mix-up back into order. I told myself I was not the kind of daughter who imagines disaster to feel important. I told myself what American daughters tell themselves when systems promise competency, that this country's paperwork might bruise you, but it will not vanish you. Then a sound rose from the back of the apartment, muffled but unmistakable, cutting through my logic like a blade through netting. My mother's ringtone, the old standard she loved, playing from behind the laundry room door that swells in summer and demands a shoulder. The melody kept time with my pulse, bright and wrong in a place it should not be, a small domestic alarm that made the whole afternoon tilt from anxiety into certainty. I drove my shoulder into the swollen door. Wood gave with a tired crack. The dryer drum reflected a square of light, and there, vibrating in the shallow metal belly, my mother's phone lit with a hospital exchange I didn't recognize and began to ring again. I pried the swollen door with my shoulder until the wood sighed, and there, in the warm metal drum, my mother's phone vibrated against the dryer wall. Screen lit with a hospital exchange I did not recognize, its ringtone threading through lint and steam like a signal from the part of the afternoon that had fallen out of view. The sight shouldn't have felt like an accusation, yet it did, because nothing about a woman headed into outpatient explains why her lifeline would be tumbling in a dryer, and the wrongness hit first as heat in my face, and then as a steadying breath that flattened my panic into the kind of attention I learned the year my father died, when the worst things were always wrapped in helpful voices and tidy folders, and you had to read the edges to find the truth. I lifted the phone with a dish towel because some feral part of me didn't want to smudge whatever story it could tell, and as the ringing fell off into voicemail, I saw the call history bloom up the screen like a confession I had not been invited to hear. A 5-minute call to private at 1:06 p.m., a 3-ring miss from the same hidden number at 1:43. The rideshare app opened at 12:58 with a pickup pin placed 2 blocks from our apartment, and then, inexplicably, and pressed again, the consent instruction sheet in my mother's tote still creased as if folded at a counter and then never touched. The signature lines that my mother would ordinarily populate with tidy initials as if the act itself could convince the universe to behave, all of it now sitting on my kitchen counter like a staged set that had been struck too fast. I could hear her voice in yesterday's kitchen, conversational and breezy and confident enough to set me at ease, and that memory, now that I understood what I was holding, felt like a costume she had put on for me. And that thought sent a cold stripe down my back because my mother is not a performer, and because we made a pact after my father's last night in the hospital, a promise that we would not wrap hard truths in soft paper, not with each other, not when the stakes were our bodies and our names. Shock is not chaos but clarity, and it swept the room, collecting facts in a line that even a stranger could follow. So I opened the Notes app and started a list that would read clean if I had to hand it to a compliance officer or a detective or a reporter. And I wrote the time at the top, and then the words I needed to repeat exactly. At 2:17 p.m., a registrar said there is no patient by my mother's name in their system. And under that I added the phone evidence in order. 5-minute call to private at 1:06. Rideshare open with no trip at 12:58. Location off 102, back on 201. Missed call from hospital exchange at 2:15. Voicemail icon glowing like a small red eye. When I opened the voicemail, the voice that filled the tiny speaker came wrapped in practiced warmth. Male, Midwestern consonants softened at the edges. Hey, it's Dr. Evan, family friend. I've got you both. I'll walk you through pre-op, no reason to stress her. Just call me back on the number I left. And the way he said family friend, as if reciting a credential, slid under my skin because the phrase was the kind that shuts down questions in rooms where people are eager to be soothed. And I heard in it that gentle coercion hospitals cultivate without admitting it, the one that turns daughters into spectators. I took photographs of the screen with my own phone, angling so my watch face sat in the corner of each shot like a notary stamp to make a scene, but the part of me my father trained, his lab report daughter, his control group girl, kept me where I was until I had the record I would need if the hospital tried to slide me into a policy script, until I could hold up paper and glass and say, "These are not feelings, these are facts." I printed the call times because paper can't be remotely edited, and as the printer hummed, I scrolled further back in my mother's messages to find the draft that must have been meant for me. A single unsent line sitting in our thread like a shard of glass. "It's not surgery." And the timestamp on the draft sat at 1:19 p.m., in the dead center of the hour where the hospital claimed not to see her, and her rideshare never launched, and her location winked off like a porch light in a neighborhood that had decided to pretend no one was home. The sentence was a blow and a balm, a truth she had almost handed me and then withheld, and the hurt of that edged my fear into anger, not the hot kind that burns fast, but the moral fury that hardens into a plan. Because if she wasn't in surgery, then where exactly was she? And if she had borrowed the hospital's language to hide from me, whose language was she hiding from? And if her name and number were being used without her body attached to them, then what machine had she been fed into? And how many other names were grinding through it to generate someone else's invoices and reimbursements and promotions? There are moments in American life when you can feel the system trying to domesticate you into patience, and the trick, I have learned, is to answer with order rather than noise. So I made a checklist on a yellow pad because ink and cellulose still frighten liars. Screenshot logs, photograph artifacts with timestamps, print call times, backup images to the cloud, export the call list as a PDF, compose an email to myself that time-stamped the attachments into an off-device record, assemble a folder that could be handed to a supervisor whose smile might be practiced, and design a set of questions that would be rude only to a person who preferred ambiguity. Unit, surgeon, check-in, consent upload user, badge swipe sequence, audit trail access. The things a compliant system can answer in seconds if no one. Single instruction designed to turn daughters into spectators. And I read it twice, as if repetition could change its shape, before the letters settled into the fact of themselves. And I understood that someone who thought they knew me was counting on my love to keep me quiet. The text on my mother's screen said, "If you love her, stop calling the hospital." The same registrar who told me, "No patient," looked up, smiled like customer service on a poster, and said, "We can't confirm or deny patient identities." Anxiety from the drier discovery stiffened into suspicion under the lobby's fluorescent calm. The badge printer kept spitting little rectangles that stamped minutes like witnesses. A glass-walled supervisor's office hovered behind half-closed blinds. A side door swallowed clipboards the way oceans take footprints. I set my proofs on the counter. The 2:17 p.m. call log, the wrong DOG wristband in a bag, the unsigned instructions, and quoted her exact sentence back to her. Her smile held, but her eyes flicked toward the fishbowl. "We wouldn't say that," she replied smoothly. "We can't confirm patient identities." Policy had replaced the person. The room taught me where to look. A neon sticky note slid onto a nearby keyboard. Numbers scrawled in a hurry. I didn't touch it. I read the hand. The flourish on the capital letter matched the wrong middle initial printed on my mother's band. Shock narrowed, not loud but precise. I unfolded the blank initial lines and asked for what honest systems produce in seconds. Consent upload user. Timestamp. Hash. The registrar tried to shoo me to a chair. I didn't sit. A records clerk passed, hair in a tired knot, voice pitched to sound like a cough. "Watch who uploads consents," she whispered. "Outpatient boards separate from OR." 2 screens, 2 truths. Moral fury cooled into method. If the upload was clean, someone could print it. If they couldn't print it, someone was hiding it. That was when he arrived, timed like theater. "Hey," he said, stepping between me and the desk with a practiced warmth. "Dr. Evan, family friend." Let me check the...
Anxiety rode in with me, but suspicion took over the moment I clocked the room's choreography. The wellness loop on a muted TV, the philodendrons staged to suggest calm, the laminated, "For your safety, identity verification required" sign in a font cheerful enough to sell spa packages. Evan hovered at my shoulder with that curated nearness he wore like cologne, producing warmth instead of answers. I set my tote on the counter and laid out what the last 2 hours had taught me to treat as language. Wristband in a clear bag with the wrong middle initial, pre-op instructions with blank initial lines my mother never would have left empty, the 2:17 p.m. call log circled in ink, because paper still pins truth to tables when people try to make it float. The manager appeared with a smile calibrated for difficult guests. I skipped the small talk because small talk is where facts go to soften. I asked for a binary. Either show me the signed consent or admit my mother is not here. The smile held while the receptionist fetched a clipboard pristine enough to pass for stage property. I took it without gratitude. The printed name was perfect down to the hyphen. The signature below looked like my mother's if you'd learned it from watching her hands on a good day and not from living with her handwriting for 30 years. The downstroke lacked her tired day weight. The flourish at the end tried too hard. In the acknowledgement boxes sat initials with the same stray curl I'd seen on the sticky note at Hospital A, and on the wristband at my sink. My pulse ticked louder at the line that made the whole page tilt. Time of signature, 1:58 p.m. 19 minutes later, Hospital A told me no patient. That is not a clerical kink. That's a lie dressed as sequence. I asked for metadata the way my father taught me to ask for lab results. Specific, unemotional, unbluffable. User ID on the upload, timestamp, hash. The manager's blink was a measured cadence. She would see what the system allows, she said. A sentence kin to, "We can't confirm or deny." She retreated through a staff-only door. The receptionist pretended to staple something. Evan leaned in so close I could feel his breath soften the air. "Let me hold the original so it doesn't go missing," he murmured, palm hovering over the page. On the initials, the sheen was suspiciously uniform. No bitten corners, no micro-hesitations. The scanned 1:59 p.m. footer stacked neatly over the upload printout the manager finally produced. User R. Lane, 2:03 p.m. I said the name aloud, Renee Lane, because names turn metadata into people, and the manager's smile thinned a millimeter, which is the unit by which practiced faces confess. Renee Lane works at Hospital A, I said, because clarity should sting. The manager switched strategies, offering context sanded into neutrality. "It looks like your mother's insurance was used here about an hour ago," she said, as if reading the weather. When I asked whether badge swipes would place my mother in the building, she lifted her chin toward security with a look that recommended sandwiches more than answers. One guard picked up a phone without dialing. Another stood, polite and large. The air learned to move us along. Evan slid into the space between me and the manager with his soft gravity voice, the one designed to convince anxious families they were being protected from their own noise. "We don't want to escalate," he told the room, the word aimed at the guards like a hand on a dog's head. My anger didn't climb. It sharpened. I returned the original consent to its clip and slid the copy into my folder with the precision of a notarization. I asked the manager to put in writing that a registrar from a different hospital had uploaded my mother's consent here, and that the signature time conflicted with the earlier denial. "I can't write what I can't confirm," she said, the institutional shrug dressed as ethics. I let security walk me toward the doors because theatrics waste oxygen, and I had what mattered. The wrong middle initial replicated across systems. A timeline that refused to be domesticated. The upload trail timed two institutions together with one registrar's name. Sunlight hit the glass and turned the lobby behind me into a single reflective plane, erasing the details we'd just fought over. In it, I saw myself holding a folder heavier than its paper, and beside me, Evan's reflection wearing the pleased expression of a better version of the moment. Her arms out, her voice breaking, some private signal that told me we were on the same side. Then her mouth chose a sentence that did not belong to her, a sentence I had heard in that laminated tone at 2 different desks today, a sentence that belongs to people who prefer order to truth. She looked exactly the way she had the day she taught me to braid, competent, kind, certain she knew best. The words she spoke were not hers. They wore the manager's smile and the registrar's posture and Evan's hush. In the glare of the lot, Carla slid between me and the clinic door, tilted her sunglasses, and said, "Don't make a scene. It's handled." Carla's voice was calm in a way that did not belong to her. Each syllable clipped like something learned by heart. "Don't make a scene. It's handled." Anxiety from the lobby turned granular in the heat of the parking lot. Every grain a thought that scraped. I stared at my aunt, the woman who taught me to braid and to balance a checkbook and to leave casseroles on grieving porches, and realized the cadence in her mouth was not family, it was institution. The phrasing was verbatim, a twin of the manager's line inside, a cousin of the registrar's tone. Suspicion lifted its head and took inventory. Carla's sunglasses hid her eyes, but her jaw worked once, a small hitch that said this performance took effort. "Handled by who?" I asked, fighting the urge to hug and shake her at the same time. "Who met Mom? Where? When? Why schedule a billing meeting on a surgery day?" I used the precise words because vagueness had become a weapon this afternoon. Carla's answer came soft and sympathetic, shaped to soothe. "She panics about paperwork, sweetheart. I dropped her to talk to the billing folks. Less stress, fewer forms on the day. You know your mother." I did. And I knew Carla, too, well enough to spot the place where her natural warmth ended and the hospital's script began. The physical tell that betrayed her sat half-tucked in her purse. A parking stub from a downtown garage stamped 1:12 p.m. Not near Hospital A, not near Partner Clinic B. Shock moved through me clean and cold. I pointed to it. Privacy. He laced the sentence with clinical jargon, utilization review, revenue cycle, care coordination, designed to cool me down by making me feel uncredentialed. It was a warm fog. If you breathed it too deeply, you could forget the shape of the room. I kept my eyes on Carla. "Who set it up?" I asked. "Who told you where to take her?" Evan answered for her. "The registrar helped coordinate. It's common. Fewer bottlenecks." The word registrar changed the temperature around us. Carla nodded too quickly, that little mechanical bob I remembered from church when she agreed with a sermon she hadn't fully heard. Then she made the slip I needed. "The she began, then corrected. "That woman from the desk would meet her." Suspicion clicked into alignment with the wrong middle initial, the sticky note, the upload by R. Lane. I heard the invisible line in Carla's voice, the one that tethered her to someone behind that glass office. "What did she look like?" I asked. "Name tag? Hair? Eye color?" Carla's calm drained a shade. "Blonde, no, brown, short hair, kind eyes." Her mouth remembered kindness, but the words wore a stranger's shoes. "Why did you turn off Mom's location from 1 to 2? I asked, holding up the phone I had pulled from the dryer, the one still warm with domestic heat, the one that should have been in my mother's coat pocket at pre-op. Carla's face shifted, just a flicker, and Evan moved a half-step closer as if to catch her answer before it hit the ground. "Phones do that when battery saver kicks in," he said. "These apps are finicky." He smiled at me the way you smile at someone you hope will accept a spoonful of something unpleasant if you call it medicine. Moral fury rose, not loud but heavy. At 1:58 p.m., a consent with my mother's name was signed at the clinic, I said. At 2:03 p.m., a registrar from Hospital A uploaded it there. At 2:17 p.m., I was told there was no patient by my mother's name. The downtown garage stamped 1:12 p.m. is not near any of those doors, and you are quoting the hospital to me like it's scripture. I kept my tone even as my pulse thudded against my watchband. Carla's mouth went soft. "I was trying to help her," she said, and the tremor in that sentence sounded like mother's care. He folded in the phrase family friend and let it sit where trust usually sprouts. I let it die there.
Family doesn't ask to take originals, I said. Family doesn't arrive right when the script needs a better actor. It came out harsher than I planned. Carla flinched. A part of me wanted to apologize. The larger part remembered the copy in my folder, and the name on the upload line, and the dryer humming to itself while my mother's phone rang inside like a heart misplaced. Ethics versus blood is not an abstract debate when the person in front of you has the same chin as your father in certain angles. I could keep the peace, let Carla tell herself she had shielded my mother from stress, accept Evan's warm fog, let the story harden around us like amber, or I could pursue fluorescent truth, the kind that makes paper sweat and faces lose their training. American families are raised on the gospel of not making scenes. Today, I understood that scenes are sometimes the only way to make the quiet parts audible. Show me the route, I said, turning the parking stub so the timestamp faced the sun. We'll pull camera feeds. Downtown garages keep better secrets than people. Who did you call when you dropped her? Carla stammered a name that slid away as soon as it arrived. Evan supplied another, a surname that typed like convenience. I watched both of them, not for words, but for that half second after a word lands, the fragment where truth rebounds or lies adjust. The adjustment was visible on both faces. I took a step back to catch the reflection in Carla's sunglasses. Me, small and sharp, folder clutched against my ribs. Evan, a helpful blur at my shoulder, the clinic's glass doors turning sky into surface. I steadied my voice. I'm going downtown. You can come or not, but I'm done being handled. Carla's phone buzzed in her hand. She didn't mean for me to see. She tilted the screen away, but the sun caught the glass and threw me the preview anyway. A crisp line of text mirrored backward in her lenses. Her thumb froze, and the borrowed calm on her face split, just a seam. My breath went still long enough to count a beat, and then another. The words were simple and coded, and exactly the kind of instruction a person uses when they think they own your next move. On Carla's lock screen, bright in the reflection, truth could not pretend to be anything else. I didn't touch a thing at first. I took out my phone, framed the open locker in tight shots, and let my watch face sit in the corner of each photo like a notary's seal. 4:06 p.m., 4:07 p.m., 4:08 p.m. I photographed the passport closed and then opened to the photo page, captured the cache from 3 angles so the band colors and the count marks would be visible later, and then the USB, front and back, the scratch near the keyring hole, the faint machine swirl around the etched letters. Chain of custody isn't something you beg for later. You build it in real time so no one can retrofit you into hysterical. Suspicion coached my hands into latex-free caution as I lifted the passport. The plastic edge was warmish from the locker's metal belly. Inside, the travel stamps stopped years ago, her last trip to see my father's sister before the world changed. I photographed the number, the expiration, the microprint lines that agencies like. The envelope of cash crackled when I eased it free. 20s, 50s, and a row of hundreds in the center like a spine. Someone had taken time to make it look accidental and then failed. The bills were too evenly stacked, the edges aligned like soldiers. I counted without removing them. 8,000, maybe 9. Enough to disappear for a while. Enough to pay someone to shepherd a name through a system. The USB was heavier than it looked, the way some lies are. I glanced over my shoulder and saw only travelers minding their lives. I sat on the bench opposite the locker and slid the drive into the side of my laptop, my fingers suddenly clumsy, as if the next click could change what my family had been for years. The drive mounted itself with polite anonymity, USB untitled, and opened to a small constellation of files organized with the same tidy aggression my mother used on spice labels. Ledger.xlsx, notes.rtf, and a folder called Audio, inside of which the dates were arranged in descending order, the most recent stamped with the day before today, time 1:59 p.m. I opened the spreadsheet first because numbers confess what sentences try to charm. 4 columns weighted like a schema. Patient, policy, handler, split. Dozens of rows. Names I did not recognize. Descriptions. R. Lane took folder to intake. E. Verified pre-init. Consent pre-filled. DON belief template carried. The language had the flat tone of an engineer writing a build log, except the build here was a fraud architecture whose elegance made me nauseous. If you can pre-initialize a consent, you can become the person the form needs, at least on paper. And paper is where hospitals live and die. I clicked the audio folder, put in my earbuds, and braced myself for the sound of my mother's voice in a room I hadn't been invited into. It arrived as a whisper learned from years of holding breath in clinics. "Okay," she said in the first file, naming the date, the time, the desk, the person. "Renee said upload now. She will clean later." In another, Evan told Mrs. P to sign where highlighted. He said initials later. They can be completed as a courtesy. The next file captured a hallway's echo, a copier's warm hum, my mother narrating it like a chess match. Copy is warm, original in Evan's folder, Renee to intake partner B. I listened to 4 more, 5, 6. Each contained a small brick, the kind you need to build a case that resists polite pressure. Anxiety slid into shock when I opened the most recent audio, the one stamped 1:59 p.m. The background sound was a familiar lobby shush. My mother's voice was thinner than usual. "If I don't show," she said, "Dr. Evan will." The sentence landed like a tool dropped on concrete. No prose, no flourish, just a plan inside a contingency. She had left me a fuse I could light if she went dark. And now that fuse glowed in my earbuds, steady and small. My phone buzzed in my pocket. Evan, the name read, because sometime in the last year I had put his number under that name, trusting the family friend label he wore like a laminated badge. I answered because predators prefer silence. "You sounded worried earlier," he said, warmth rehearsed, concern pre-assembled. "Where are you? I can meet you. If you found anything confusing, anything that might look dangerous out of context, I can take it off your hands so no one misinterprets." His voice gentled on misinterprets. It was an old American lullaby. Let the professional hold it, with a subject line that would be embarrassing in any context but this. "If I am stopped, this is the ledger." I wrote the locker number in the body and the time in the subject. I exported the spreadsheet to PDF because good software lives in the same building as plausible deniability, and I wanted a format that resists quiet edits. I photographed the screen itself, my watch face dutiful in the corner. Chain of custody is just a promise you keep on paper until someone else has to honor it. Stakes widened as I scrolled the names again. Mrs. P, Mr. Alvarez, E. Johnson, an initial and a last name I recognized from a church bulletin last spring. People whose voices I could imagine, whose patience might have been harvested and sold back to them as care. I felt the floor of this country, the layers of forms and fees and copays and kindnesses tilt under my feet the way a boat tilts when a hidden weight shifts. If someone could turn my mother into a template, then anyone without a daughter or a folder could vanish between an outpatient board and an OR board and be reborn as somebody else's reimbursement. I closed the laptop, slid the passport into my tote, left the cash where it lay because movement changes the charge on the scene, and pocketed the USB with the kind of reverence you reserve for small, heavy things that could change a weather system. I shut the locker, spun the dial, listened to the click that said this piece of the day had sealed. Then I stood, feeling the anxiety drain into the steadier current of resolve, and began to move through the terminal like a person who had decided on her next step without telling the room what it was. I had almost reached the exit when I opened one last audio file, shorter than the rest, newer by minutes, and my mother's voice, no longer careful, named the 2 people the ledger had taught me to fear in plain text, as if she were setting them into the record for the day someone would need to read it back to a room full of lawyers. Renee Lane and Evan. The home camera timeline showed a perfect 40-minute hole, clean as a surgeon's cut, bracketed by motion events that proved the system was awake before and after, but conveniently blind in between. Anxiety, which had softened into something like competence at the bus terminal, returned with teeth when I opened the security app and saw that pale gray paperwork. The device had last been paired to my father's phone. Shock took the air out of the room without making a sound. For a long breath, I could not look straight at the screen, because the idea that someone had used my dead father's access to blind this house felt like sacrilege. He loved documenting the real, rain gauges and classroom lab photos, and the way light changed on the porch in October. He would have told me that electricity obeys rules even when people don't. Seeing his device ID in that log was an obscenity written in his tidy hand. Moral fury came in right behind the shock and stood very still, because stillness is the only way to hold anger without letting it run you. I pulled the raw clips around the gap, frame by frame, like a seamstress checking stitches. At 1:11 p.m., the hallway camera caught sunlight breaking across the floor as the door cracked open. At 1:12, a shape like Carla's head and shoulders flashed past the corner of the frame, then vanished. The clip stopped cleanly. At 2:01 p.m., the hallway light clicked on, no body in the frame, as if a hand had extended from the air to tap the switch. None of it made sense until the neighbor's name appeared in my notifications. A new doorbell video shared to our building thread with the casual generosity people reserve for porch pirates and raccoons. I asked for permission to view and watched the angle I never get from inside my own life. Carla's sedan nosing to the curb at 1:10 p.m. The passenger door opening. A second figure stepping out in my mother's raincoat, hood up, despite sunlight. The person's gait was wrong for my mother. Longer stride, weight pitched slightly forward. The camera captured a sliver of profile as the hood turned. It looked like anonymity, not like a face. If the house was blinded from 1:18 to 1:58, and the neighbor's camera saw Carla at 1:10, the choreography was suddenly legible. Arrive, disable, extract, re-enable. I went back to the admin log. The session closed at 1:59 p.m. The same minute my mother's last audio memo recorded, "If I don't show, Dr. Evan will." The system's facts arranged themselves.
People defensive, he typed, as if I were a skittish animal he could calm by dimming the lights. I stared at the thread until the blue bubble that meant he was still there, still typing, vanished. I answered with the kind of sentence that changes nothing on the surface, but reroutes the river beneath. I agreed to meet. I told him I wanted clarity, and that I would come alone because that is the lie people like Evan expect daughters to tell. Then I began to build the kind of protection that lives outside trust. I mirrored the USB to a second cloud and a third. I zipped the entire folder tree and sent it to a reporter whose tip line I had bookmarked years ago and never needed until today, attaching a note with just enough detail to make it interesting and just enough timestamps to make it hard to ignore. I forwarded a duplicate to an attorney friend of my father's who had once gotten a school board to release emails they swore were gone. I wrote a subject line that said, plainly, "If I stop replying, look here," and in the body, pasted the admin login string and the neighbor's doorbell time, and the line from the ledger that paired RL with EV over an insurance policy that wasn't ours. In that administrative calm, I felt something like grief pass through and become resolve. I thought of my father's device ID sitting there like a signature on a permission slip no one had asked him to sign. I thought of my mother's voice teaching her breath to be quiet so her words would not shake the microphone. I thought of Carla's borrowed calm and the way her phone had flashed Locker 317 like a command. I looked up and saw our living room the way an outsider would. Scuffed floor, tidy books, a dent in the couch cushion where my mother sits to fold towels. And I felt the cold certainty that if I didn't move carefully now, this ordinary room would swallow the evidence of my life as neatly as the camera had swallowed 40 minutes. I packed the mic I use for work calls and clipped it inside my jacket, checked the battery twice, set my phone to record from a lock screen shortcut that doesn't advertise itself. I split my notes into 2 emails scheduled to send in 10 minutes if I didn't cancel them. I printed the admin log and slid it behind the copied consent in my folder, the paper edges
With the very small arrogance of a woman in a hospital lanyard rested an elbow on the edge, her badge flipped backward as if privacy were fashion. She had the precise smile of someone who knows how many ways a problem can be made to go quiet. Registrar Renee Lane looked up at my window, met my eyes like we had been introduced in some other life, and gestured for me to come down and get into her car. Renee smiled up at me from the idling sedan, praised my composure like a dentist praising flossing, and called what I had just mapped a billing optimization that helps patients. Anxiety tried to push me backward toward the apartment, but suspicion marched me down the steps. She wore a hospital lanyard with the badge flipped backward, privacy posed as style, and the AC from her car spilled out in a clean, expensive ribbon that made the afternoon. I stayed on the sidewalk, the curb a thin jurisdiction I chose to honor. "You've had a stressful day," she said, palms open, voice set to the temperature of a therapy podcast. "Different systems, duplicate entries, misunderstandings. You're doing great." It was the cadence professionals use to walk families off cliffs. I met her eyes and didn't blink. She tilted her head, then delivered the sentence that told me everything about what she had touched. "At 2:17 p.m., she recited, "my colleague said, 'There's no patient by your mother's name.' Those were your exact words, yes?" She hadn't guessed. She had monitored the call. Shock sharpened to a point. "You were listening." She didn't bother denying it. "Triage requires context," she replied, a bureaucratic hymn. She gestured to the passenger seat. "Let's talk where no one can misinterpret." The pause before the last word suggested an audience I couldn't see. I did not move. "The wrong birth date on the wristband," I said, setting my folder against my ribs. "How does that happen in a helpful system?" She smiled like we were brainstorming. "The template fills that," she started, then choked the word off, like a singer who'd swallowed a note. Template, not accident, not fatigue, a pattern preloaded to be efficient. Before I could press, a familiar voice slid in from the curbside with the confidence of a person arriving.
"Something I could pour." "Then we'll keep it simple," I said. "You want the USB." Renee's mouth stayed kind while her eyes hardened one click. "We want to prevent harm," she said. Evan added the surgical close. "People misread raw files. Lives get ruined because context gets lost." He softened his consonant. "Let us hold the dangerous parts so you don't have to carry that weight." I pictured the ledger columns, the neat splits, the names of people who would never know where their patients had gone. "It's backed up and time-stamped in multiple places," I said, not as a boast but as a fact. "If I disappear, it multiplies." Renee's smile thinned, respect mixed with irritation. "Diligent," she said. "Your father would be proud." It hit like a slap. "Leave him out of your mouth," I said, level enough to sound quieter than anger. She recovered without apology. "Here's the realistic path," she said, rolling into solutions. "You hand me the drive. I hand you assurance we'll review and correct anomalies. You and your mother get privacy, not headlines." She pronounced privacy like a brand. I held the curb line. "You can't make my mother a template," I said. "You can make a field that looks like her, but that isn't the same thing." Evan's face betrayed a flicker that might have been contempt or admiration. With men like him, those feelings share a chord. Renee's phone chimed with an alert that changed her posture. She glanced at the screen, and the carefully respectful tempo of her sentences sped by a half beat. "We're late," she said, more to Evan than to me. "Partner location." A motel name glowed on the glass, a place that had mastered the art of looking invisible beside a highway. She slid the car into gear and lowered her voice one last notch to sell mercy to a daughter who refused to be small. "Get in. We'll do this without an audience." I didn't move. "I'll follow," I said. She read what I wasn't saying. The recorder clipped inside my jacket, the emails scheduled, the paper in my folder, and made a choice that told me she liked her odds. "Suit yourself," she said, and the sedan pulled away with Evan in the passenger seat, his silhouette angled toward her like a co-pilot. I got in my car and stayed 3 vehicles back, counting turns aloud the way I used to count than the carpet in the rooms could possibly be. They didn't park out front. Their sedan slid along the back fence line toward a dark angle between Building B and Building C, a cut-through meant for maintenance, not guests. I eased into a spot by the ice machine, watched their brake lights wink out, and let the engine die so sound wouldn't dull what my body needed to hear. My phone hummed as the first scheduled email left my outbox. Good. I stepped out, closed my door with the careful pressure of a thief who wants to remain a neighbor, and followed the line of cinder block toward the gap where their car had disappeared, past the vending machine humming to itself, and the laundry room with its coin slots scarred by keys. The walkway opened on a narrow service lane. The air back there smelled like hot Freon and old soap. I turned the corner, pulse tallying time, and saw the strip of parking behind Building C where the maintenance trucks slept. Their sedan was already empty. 50 feet ahead, on the second-floor walkway, a door hung not quite closed, the number crooked on its plaque like a badge pinned in a hurry. Light leaked through the crack in a stripe onto the concrete. Room 24's door was ajar. She sat on the edge of the bed like a witness choosing every inch of posture. Blood pressure cuff beside her, eyes steady in a way fear can't counterfeit. Anxiety softened just enough for suspicion to work. Antiseptic wipes on the nightstand. The spread pulled tight. A chair aimed at the door like someone had practiced exits. "It's me," I said. She watched what I carried before she looked at my face. "I staged the surgery," she said. "No apology, just a decision. If they grabbed me, the ledger would have to surface through you." Shock flared and passed. She slid out a scuffed flip phone. Taped under the back was a memory card. On screen, Renee tucking an envelope beneath consents. Evan at a copier, finger tapping a signature box, his voice in a low clip. "Sign where I've highlighted, initials later as a courtesy." The proof hit clean, but the timeline still snagged. "The 40-minute hole," I said. "A test run," she answered. "It went wrong." Which device? Whose login? Her specifics wobbled. Carla's name appeared. Evan's instruction. Keep it simple. Floated where
Pragmatism made sense. We drew the route on motel stationery. 3:11 a.m. email to compliance marked imminent patient harm. Attach redacted ledger pages. Request raw badge swipes. Upload hashes. Audit access. Print everything because paper frightens liars. Mirror packets to a reporter in council. Then the boundary. "I protect you for truth, not for scripts," I told her. "If any part is theater, say it now." "It isn't," she said. "I thought if I made you angry enough, you'd be braver than me." I filed the sentiment for later and slid the plan into my folder beside the copied consent and camera log. The air shifted. A shadow paused across the crack in the door. Adrenaline climbed my spine with icy resolve. Knuckles tapped once, gentle, practiced. "Mrs. Hale," Evan said through the wood, voice velveted for bedside. "It's time. Bring your daughter." At 3:11 a.m., I sent compliance an email titled "Imminent Patient Harm, Emergency Session," attached redacted ledger pages, and felt my hands go steady in a way that frightened me more than fear ever had. By 5:30 a.m., Boardroom A glowed behind glass. Executives in a row. Legal with yellow pads, compliance at the head, 2 security officers posted like punctuation. I sat center sightline, recorder visible on my lap, and laid out the spine of the day. 12:41 gas, 1:12 downtown garage, 1:58 consent signed, 2:03 upload by R. Lane at Partner Clinic B, 2:17 no patient from Hospital A, 1:18 to 1:58 my home camera blinded, badge swipes pending. Paper embarrassed the room the way truth does when it refuses to apologize. I opened with process and principle. Raw audit logs for consent creation and upload. User IDs, workstation IDs, full hash history. IP geolocation for the admin session on my camera. Badge swipes for the registrar and Dr. Evan from 1:40 to 2:10 at both sites. Print them. Then I said the sentence I wanted in the minutes. Patients aren't templates. Timestamps don't lie. The records clerk entered late, eyes down, slate folder tucked close. When I finished, she spoke without looking at me. Backward, carrying a sealed folder. She set it before the chair as if placing a dessert no one had ordered. My name stared from the tab in the same tidy script I'd seen on a wristband and a sticky note. She smiled the way people smile when they've rehearsed the next scene.
Perhaps we should start with what she did, Renee said, tapping the folder labeled with my name. Counsel cleared his throat with the ceremony of a man about to move furniture in a glass house, and alleged that I had manipulated hospital logs using my father's old admin device. Anxiety surged, hot and unhelpful, but suspicion took the wheel before I could look small. The attorney laid out a narrative with the efficiency of a travel itinerary. Admin login at 1:15 p.m., camera blind from 1:18 to 1:58, daughter at home, with motive and technical access inherited like an unfortunate heirloom. He slid a page across the table showing my father's device ID, and for a second shock made the room tilt because grief and accusation used the same door. She had both opportunity and sentiment, he finished, tasting the word like a victory. I let the sentence rest in the minutes where it would be read later, and then I set down the counter-evidence, one vertebra at a time, slow enough to be undeniable. This is the wristband issued to my mother, I said, placing the clear bag so the blue plastic caught the fluorescence. Wrong middle initial, wrong date of birth. The error matches a flourish in Ms. Lane's handwriting on a sticky note from yesterday's desk. Next, the copied consent, still faintly warm in my memory of the printer. The signature's pen pressure is wrong. Uniform sheen, no bite at the corners of the initials, and the consent hash in the system does not match the scanner's native log. I handed compliance 2 printouts, their files hash and the device's auto log with a different string. Legal's pen lifted off the page like a plane aborting takeoff. Physics check, I said, and heard my father in the phrasing. Badge swipes place Ms. Lane in 2 systems at 1:58 p.m., Outpatient Board and Partner Clinic B, while Dr. Evan was texting me from the lobby of Hospital A. The bodies do not fit the pads. I pointed to the badge report they had just printed, a tidy constellation of beeps that contradicted the story counsel preferred, and the IP for the admin.
Can't sweet-talk them. She slid a second folder toward compliance. This is the raw pull from the copy station by Partner Clinic B intake. Consent scanned 1:59 p.m. Uploaded user R. Lane. Device signature matches the one we just printed. Her hand trembled once and then stilled, as if the act of saying it had pinned her to the floor. Shock reconfigured itself into moral fury, cool, directional. I lifted the recorder on my lap so no one in the room could claim they hadn't seen it. You can paint me anxious, I said, but timestamps don't love me. They will say the same thing tomorrow. I turned to Evan because sometimes the shortest path through a lie is to make it breathe. When you left me at the Hospital A desk, where did you go? His smile was the professional kind that has never told the truth under oath. Downstairs, he said. Outpatient. Partner Clinic B's admin subnet disagrees, I answered, setting the IP printout next to the badge swipes that placed him on a different floor than the one he was claiming. So does your text to me from the lobby of Hospital A at 2:01 p.m., which would have required you to be in 2 buildings at once. Legal opened his mouth to object, but Evan got there first, the reflex that betrays a man who can't bear not to control the narrative. Look, he said, palms out. I prepped the template, all right? That's not sinister. It's how we make sure patients... Template, I repeated, letting the word do its own violence in the room. Renee's head turned the slightest degree, a dog hearing a familiar whistle. The chair looked from Evan to Renee as if he had been handed a second ending to a play he had thought was predictable. I didn't gloat. I nodded toward the recorder. Thank you for clarifying. The phrase matches Miss Lane's earlier admission in the car. Human testimony is messy, but there are rooms where mess is the only honest medium. I faced the executives and the wall of glass behind them and spoke as if the lobby outside could hear me. My mother is not a template. Mrs. P, whose cardigan is in your hallway camera, is not a template. The names in this ledger are not variables to be optimized for a revenue target. If you let this be about my temperament, you are choosing a story that spares you from reading your own logs. Compliance stopped pretending to cough and ordered live polls. Full consent creation histories, works as a tone in compliance's inbox. The board chair's phone lit. Legal's laptop pinged. The clerk glanced toward the door like she had heard thunder. I didn't have to say I'd structured redundancy. The emails said it for me. External pressure landed with the efficient cruelty of a mirror. A reporter's message to the board's public address with badge logs and upload timestamps I had not sent them directly, mirrored from the packets in escrow. The subject line was unembarrassed.
Ghost patient consents. Internal logs say other words. The chair's assistant stepped in, pale with the burden of interrupting. He bent to Compliance's ear, whispered once, and the words changed the temperature of the room faster than any argument I could have made. The assistant straightened, swallowed, and repeated for the table because repetition makes reality set. The reporter is live in the lobby, he said, and she's showing badge logs that contradict Ms. Lane. In real time. On the lobby monitors, the reporter stacked audit overlays like transparencies, while inside, Compliance printed the same logs and read the contradictions aloud, the paper curling warm as if truth made heat. Handler codes RL and EV mapped cleanly to payroll IDs. The ledger's split column mirrored insurer payouts by date. No color, no opinion, just columns refusing to pretend. Security moved when the math finished. They asked Renee to stand. She kept her badge flipped backward out of habit. When shown the 2:03 p.m. user R Lane upload, her throat worked once and the words context, error, industry norm fell without making a dent. She gave her wrists quietly. Evan tried to ride tone, best practice, patient-centered, misunderstood, until badge swipes and IP logs put him in two places at once. When he pivoted to gallantry on my mother's behalf, the room's patience ended. Security flanked him. The door that usually opened for his voice stayed shut. Carla's color returned in increments. She told the room what she'd done and why. When counsel said the word immunity, she didn't grab it. She accepted it like a treatment plan. Witness handling shifted to the DA.
Either run us. Motifs closed themselves. The blue wristband, wrong DOB, wrong middle initial, went into an evidence bag. The USB became Exhibit A, then an archive with our joint statement. Later, my watch, the one I kept framing at 2:17 p.m., went on a chain at my throat. Not trophy, but metronome. By month's end, I had a volunteer list, a template for victim notices that refused euphemisms, and a role I hadn't sought. Advocate for patient identity rights. Work, not aesthetics. We brought tea home to a kitchen that smelled like lemon. Quiet settled. Then a soft slide under the door broke it, the confident hush of Manila across wood. Inside lay a hospital badge from a logo I didn't know, and a single sheet, folded twice. You only found one ledger. Do you want the rest? One question. If it were your parents' name on that template, what would you do? Go public or go deeper? Comment public or deeper with one reason. Share this with one person in healthcare and tag a hospital that needs the Hail Rule. Subscribe and turn on alerts. The next drop reveals the second ledger.